we really appreciate Paul Andrews coming down, especially on a Saturday. So, instead of a presentation, Paul is going to be doing question and answer, so Q&A. And there were a couple of questions that were already sent in, and, other than that, if you have questions for him, then, you know, he's, more than willing to answer them. He doesn't have a timeline for this morning, so we can pretty much go as long as, you know, within our time constraint.
Here with you, I've spoken with Lee many times and I've posted many of you coming through our office, so I really wanted to just open it up because it always seems like you have great questions. You have things that you're trying to figure out or want to work on. I have a lot of stuff that we can just kind of bounce around and talk about. Maybe let's start with stuff that's going on in elections right now, just at our office, what we're doing. As you're all aware, we've opened the new ballot processing center. In cooperation with the Department of Emergency Management, and we opened up by the notice from our existing building. We were squeezed in there, and we ended up having to move half of the operation into the commissioners' chambers to be able to function, because we just with turnout, the county's getting bigger, and we know it will only continue to get bigger. The county was very gracious in including us. We received some incredible funding, part of the COVID money that the county received, and that was used to purchase the building and renovate it. We also knew that they would help us find a place if we started making it a little uncomfortable for them. So us taking their space meant that it was harder for them to conduct business. So it was an encouraging way we went about that. We got the new building, and it is working great. And we will be kind of evolving in that building. We're figuring out how we want to fill the space, how we want information to flow through there. But just on the initial outside, it was very successful for us. So we're very excited.
What's it near? Where's it located? I don't know.
Do you know where the Public Works Annex building is? Barney White Road. Yeah, it's right behind the Public Works Annex. Now, what I was told never to say, and I'm going to say it to you, it's actually right across the street from the dump. So you know where the dump is. When you're coming out of the dump and you're at that, you're at the road, we are the property just on the other side of the trees. So
Yeah.
But Barney White, and it's hard if I give you the address because Imperial, which is the road, winds around through there. So you find yourself coming off onto Barney White, and then it's like, oh, I need to be on Imperial. So you take that first right-hand turn, and then that winds you back around, and then you're back to Barney White again.
Yeah.
And then an Imperial crosses, and then you go around and then you finally find us. So we're behind Public Works. So. And one of the advantages we got with the new building was more cameras. We were able, because we were in a better organized space, we have more streaming cameras, so you can actually watch more of what we do. I recommend when I first got elected, in the hopes of building more transparency around what happens. I've mailed that ballot off, I've put it in a ballot drop box. What's happening now? And so the camera allows you to see what we're doing. It doesn't answer all the questions yet, and we're working on some video information that will explain those processes to kind of walk you through the life of the ballot. But with more cameras, you can see more of the room. You can see more of the ballot processing machine, which we got a new machine as part of this facility also. It's significantly faster, and it's impressive just to watch what it can do. So we have more cameras. That's really helping. And it just happened also coincidentally coincided with an upgrade of the voting system. So our vendor that we use for tabulating all of the equipment, Hart Intercivic is the name of the company, and that's HART. They had an upgrade, and so we coincided that upgrade with moving in. So all of that tabulation equipment, it had significant improvements for us security wise and all that, but the look and feel was very similar. So we weren't concerned about introducing a new program for doing the tabulation because we knew how to run their system. So this had more security on the back end, and probably the biggest benefit was it actually, this is the first version that is reverse compatible. And that means that we can pull old election information into it. So we often get requests because we have a retention period. And if we make an upgrade, we often get requests for information from a previous election that we can't access. So we've had to keep old computers behind in boxes so that if we get a request, we can pull them out so that we can actually read the information. Now with this new system, we don't have to have a historical computer sitting in the background anymore. We can just, apply whatever, we can pull whatever information out of the current system. So that's been a really nice thing there.
What was the name of that again, please?
The Heart Verity, so it's Heart InterCivic.
InterCivic,
Is
okay.
there, but Verity 2.7 is the actual software. Like I said, we got a new ballot sorting machine, and that's the machine that moves all of the ballots. It checks in the ballot. And then after we've signature verified it sorts it based on accepted and challenged signatures. And then it also sorts it into what part of the county that ballot's from, so that we can keep them together when they go into boxes. It helps us with, if we ever have to do a recount, or if we have some kind of question, we keep like ballots, from areas of the county together. This new machine's a lot faster. And I thought it was really fast. I mean, you watch it, and I think we've gotten it up to about 24,000 ballots an hour is the pace that it's going. And it's really impressive and it's really fast. But what I noticed is I can see a space between the envelopes, which is okay. And I only bring that up because I was just at King County, and now King County has the big brother to our machine. You can't see anything between those ballots when it's whipping through that machine. And theirs, they say, does 45,000 ballots an hour. And it is fast. It's, but theirs is 4 levels tall, and it sorts them into, it's got so many more pockets than we have. But, yeah, so we have this new sorting machine. One of the biggest benefits, though, that we're getting from this new building is the fact that we are now our own coop, and that's that continuity of operations. So if something were to happen, so prior to the new building, if something were to happen and we were needing a place to process ballots, we were going to have to go to Vancouver, Washington, because Vancouver was our compatible county of size and equipment and all of that would allow us to be able to do what we need to do. So if there was a fire, flood, something, earthquake, something that happened to the building where we could not function, we'd have to pack everything up, go down to Clark County, do our work, and then come home. Now we're our own coop, because when we got the new building, we actually left all of the old stuff behind. So we have a sorter, we have tabulation equipment, we have all of the racks and the trays, and everything we need is still left behind, because when we set up the new building, we went all new. So we got all new cabinets, all new carts, all new trays, and so we can now support ourselves. So if something happens, we have 2 facilities that odds are one of them's still going to be good. But the other part of that I'm excited about that we're working on now is we can also now be a coop to the peninsula counties. So Mason, Jefferson, and Clallam, we can offer services to them because we have a facility that's big enough for their needs, that has everything they're going to need. All they have to do is bring their ballots in. So we're working on developing something for that, because now we have a dedicated space that's just always sitting there. So that's one of our exciting things. So drop boxes, you heard a lot about drop boxes over the last election, and there is a lot of security that we have that's involved with a drop box, but we're in the process of upgrading that. One of the companies that we got involved with a couple of years ago that offered us some tracking capability and some motion detection or impact detection, things like that, has offered a new product that also has heat detection, and it's got better antennas in it so that it can report back, and the tracking is better and more regular, shorter intervals. So we can do a lot more with their new equipment. So we're in the process of actually upgrading that equipment that's in those boxes. So one of the things that we use their equipment for, just kind of thinking about, we have 28 cars or groups of people that go out to each of the boxes, and they're picking up the ballots, they're putting them in these boxes, they're sealing them up, and then they're driving them back to us. And we've never had, hopefully it's real wood. We've never had, an accident or anything that's happened with one of those ballot groups. But had we have, where did the ballots go? If something happened to that vehicle and it had to be towed away, where did it get towed to? And we never had to deal with that, but now, once we started working with this company, Link Labs, what we started doing was we send a transponder with each of the groups. And when they would get the ballots, they'd drop the transponder into the box, they'd seal it in. And now we could follow that box wherever it went that night until it got back to our office. And when we opened the box, we take the transponder up and we put it back into our storage thing. And so we were using that. Now, these newer units report faster, more frequently, and so it's gonna provide us more real-time tracking. But some of the other benefits we're looking at is like, when the teams get to those boxes, they typically get there about a half hour before election closes at 8 o'clock. And they have to call into the office. So we're waiting on 28 phone calls from these groups getting there, and they're checking in with us saying, okay, we're here. And then when they leave, they call and say we're leaving. This new equipment, because we have a sensor in the physical ballot drop box and they're carrying a sensor, when they get within a proximity of each other, we can have them report themselves. So the sensors can now do the reporting, which will save us a phone call. We'll be able to monitor it on a computer screen, so we'll know when the teams got there, because we'll get confirmation that the two transmitters are within, 50 feet, 100 feet of each other. And when they leave, we'll get the same thing. They have now left. They're no longer within that same, they use the technical term geofence. You probably are familiar with it if you have a dog that has one of those little shock collars, and that it's that same kind of idea, is that as long as these two are within a range of each other, they're communicating. And once, either when they get together, they say, hey, we're together, or when they separate, they say, hey, we're apart. My car does the same thing with an Apple AirTag. It tells me that I'm no longer with my car because I left an AirTag in my car. But it's the same idea. So we can use technology it'll free up staff time, because we won't have to dedicate a person to be at the phone waiting, and we can get some other stuff done during the time. We'll be more efficient.
You've been in the drop boxes now, I mean.
What's that?
Nice enough.
What actually has been in the drop boxes up until this new stuff? I just thought it was a box. I had no idea that you had sensors and things in there.
Yeah, we don't typically just talk about what we do. I mean, it's just one of those things.
No, but it makes me feel better to know that my sensors.
Yeah, the sensor we currently have that we're now replacing it had a motion detection on it. So we mounted it on the door, so that when the door opened or closed, it would send us a notification that the door has moved. And then the other thing it had in it was, so let's say I hit by a truck or a car or something like that, any kind of a hard jolt, or if we slammed the door, that might be enough to set it off to say, okay, this was a hard jolt, like something, it was impacting in some sense. So basically the value to that for us was that it would let us know that we should probably go look at the box and see what's going on, because we know when our teams are there, because we have ballot pickup teams that are going out on regular intervals. So if we're getting that kind of a report during the day, it's easy to say, oh, well, the team is there, that door just opened, they must have slammed the door when they were closing it. So, but now this actually reports, it utilizes Microsoft Teams, and it will report for us every time either the door opens or closes, because it has a sensor. I'm looking at the doors here to see. It's similar to, I simply say, those home security systems. It's got a physical open close sensor that's mounted in it. So it'll be able to tell us if the door is left open, it'll be able to tell us that. And then when the door is closed, it'll be able to tell us the doors are closed. So we'll get that. And then it still has that impact sensor. So it received a significant hit. I mean, it could be a kid just, bouncing off of it, playing. It could be somebody trying to hit it. But then the new sensor also has that heat sensor in it.
So did the places like in Vancouver and, where they had the fires, did they have a heat sensor?
No, but they did have, and the same thing we also have that I haven't mentioned is we do have fire suppression systems inside of the boxes. And it's the same thing that you would find in a commercial restaurant, that they magnetize to the top of the air hood over the cooking surface. If a fire starts, it sets off this device that extinguishes with a powder. But The device that was used in Portland and Vancouver, it was better than that. It was applied from the outside. So one of the things about when they design these boxes, they design them with a lot of science involved or in mind. You know, the airspace inside of it is very contained. The slot is very limiting. You can't like light a match and get it through the ballot drop slot because it will extinguish it. You know, that it will suffocate the fire. There's a lot of things that are just in how they've designed them that limit a lot of that. But what happened in Vancouver was they used a device on the outside of the box that had an intense fire because it actually burned through 1/4-inch steel. So it was a device that would act like a cutting torch, except it was portable. So that's why they had, I mean, what we're trying to understand though is why did Portland have the same device used, but they didn't have near the damage that Vancouver had. And so we don't understand yet why the difference. You know, why did one work better than the other when it was effectively the same device? And then, but they were, the boxes were by the same manufacturer, you know, so all of those types of conditions were the same. The other thing that we talk about is, you know, people say, well, you need cameras on boxes, and it's like, well, we have 2 fires right now that happened on cameras that are on boxes that had cameras, so that didn't deter anybody, but and from the footage that I've seen and even the stuff that you've probably seen of those 2 events, it's hard to get a good quality picture because, you know, lighting is gonna be an issue and location where you can put the camera. I mean, there's a lot of variables. So we've looked at our boxes to try and figure out, could we put a camera? And then if you're putting a camera, where do you put it? Because one side, you're gonna get the person coming up to it, so you're gonna see their face. The other side, you're gonna get more of the area and everything happening around it, but you're gonna get the back of somebody, you know, and it's like, there's not a lot of what's best for it. So, and then we get into the whole public records, and I'm fine with that. It's just, I already have to dedicate a staff person to public records requests for everything else, and storing and then providing, video files can be a challenge. We hear that from the police, the different sheriff's offices and police departments that have body cam footage, and the amount of work that they've had to put into just being able to provide that information out again. That all comes at a cost of employees and cost of, you know, the community, you know, the cost of administering an election and all of that, because we're gonna have to have more people just handle those things. So it's all these little things we're trying to work through. If there was a program that had a funding mechanism for it, I'd definitely be doing it. But if I have to fund it, I also have to look at what's, you know, most effective and responsible for doing those things.
You said that there's different manufacturers. I guess I'm just thinking about, you know, people in other states who are complaining about the ballot boxes and wanting to take them away. In those other states, are most of them equipped with most of what you're talking about?
You know, I don't know what is being used in other states. I would assume for the most part that at least some kind of fire suppression device is being used in them, but outside of that, I don't know. This, when we started using this Link Labs, the motion sensor thing, they weren't marketing themselves to elections at all. And we found out about this device, and it's like, you know, that worked in the ballot drop box, and so we contacted them. And they, you know, they were like, well, yeah, we got this device, and, you know, and so we, through a lot of communication, they sent us a few, we tested them, and then we bought a bunch. And then I think they realized, hey, we have a business here, because now they've changed their whole business model. When they sold us the device, it was we buy it, we have it, and it works and all that. Now it's a subscription service, and we get the device basically for free, but we have to pay for it year over year. But they've also enhanced the services, because now they're looking at, well, you can do this with it, you can do that with it. And my understanding is that one of the counties that got involved with them around the time we did, they're working with the University of Washington right now to develop a weight sensor that we can put in the bottom of our box that would plug into this Link Lab device. And then it would report basically how many ballots are in the box. So then we'd know if we need to go empty the box or not, how full it's getting. Because right now, we kind of use a historical pattern. So we know that we have days that are lighter days in the earlier times leading up to the election, and then as we get closer to the election, and based on what we know turnout has historically been for that type of election over the years, we know that, okay, we're gonna have to go this box twice today, we'll go, at noon, and we'll go again at 8 o'clock, so that we can relieve, the amount of ballots that are in there so that it's not overfilled. If we can get a weight sensor in the box, now we can in real time just watch and see where the boxes are sitting with the amount of weight sitting on top of that sensor. And know that, okay, we can skip this box for the noon pickup and we'll just get it at 8 o'clock tonight. So those are things, enhancements that this technology, we know, and we just expect that this company is just gonna keep developing more and more things that they'll be able to add on to this, because they've discovered a niche for themselves in this line of work. Yeah.
Just listening to what you're saying, it sounds to me like there's a lot of tinkering going on and a lack of standardization across other states or even on a federal level. Is that a correct assumption? And I'm wondering to what extent that could be exploited to sow these seeds of distrust that.
Well, yeah, and there's, that's, tinkering's an interesting word, but I'll go with it. It's tinkering to me implies maybe something a little more nefarious. Than every state does elections a little bit different. And that's just the fact that there's 5 states that do vote by mail exclusively. Everybody does vote by mail. It's just to what level? And what are the restrictions around their vote by mail? So just like here in Washington, we had polling places, and then we had that excuse vote by mail. So you had to have a letter from your doctor, or you had to be traveling, and you'd have to prove, like with a plane ticket or a cruise ticket for a cruise ship or something. And so they had this, excuse absentee voting. And then over time, excuse absentee evolves into no excuse absentee, because one, you get so many more people that are looking for excuses, and you become inundated that the legislature finds that, okay, well, we'll go with no excuse. Anybody that wants an absentee ballot can get it. And so then more people start asking for it, and then you reach a certain saturation point in absentee voting where more of your voters are voting absentee than they are in polling places, which is what happened in Washington, where they then decided, okay, we're just gonna go all vote by mail, because right now we're administering 2 elections. We're doing this absentee voting, and we're mailing out these ballots, but then we're also having to get ready to stand up all of these polling places so that we can manage and receive the rest of those ballots. And Washington got to a point where they were like, we have more people doing absentee than we have coming to the polling places, let's flip the switch. And that's across the nation, that's what's happening, is that there are, and then they're, depending on the political lean of those states, it's how accepting they are of the vote by mail. But the interesting thing is that from the legislative, the House and Senate, at a federal level, the people that are most opposed to it are also the ones that are using it. They're the ones that are doing vote by mail. They're just saying you can't do vote by mail. So they are finding advantages to it themselves, but they still have an issue with it for whatever that reason is. So there are differences, but there are a lot of similarities in how we have to do what we do. Like, there's a lot of talk about, well, you're trusting a signature, and it's like, yeah, but other states are also trusting a signature because they use what they call a poll book. And depending on their poll book, that poll book has a sample signature of the voter, and they're coming in and they're signing it. And somebody's doing a signature verification there in person, and then they're letting it go in the vote. It's no different than what we're doing. Other states are saying, okay, you have to show your ID, where the federal government has said, well, ID isn't, you can't require an ID. So we had a problem with our Secretary of State. So they, every 5 years, they come in and audit us. They observe an election, and then they tell us things that, need to be changed, or things that we're doing great or whatever. And they observed one of my employees take an ID from somebody, and they didn't take the ID because we were checking the ID. They took the ID because they didn't know how to spell their name. And it was a very unique name. And it was just easier to take it off of the ID than to have the person try to work it out for them. And they're like, you can't take an ID. And they documented that as you can't do this. And it's like, okay, but you understand what happened here. And it's like, you can't do this. So every state has different ways that they interpret or handle those laws. But we're fine. We will just we'll make changes, you know, okay, write your name down, hopefully I can read what you wrote, and we'll find you eventually. We're just trying to be more efficient and, you know, get the person in and out of the office. But
You said the federal government doesn't allow,
they did,
they did.
yeah, so the federal requirement for, and we'll get into that, I'm sure, at some point. The requirements for the federal government was you attested to, you didn't have to show proof. And so we weren't allowed to do any of that. So ballot boxes, we're working on our next upgrade on those, and those will be rolled out by this next election. So the equipment, I just signed the contracts and everything with the company, so. And it is surprisingly affordable. I mean, you wouldn't want to be doing it yourself at home every year because it's like, oh, I'm spending $5,000-6,000, but for me with 20 some boxes and everything that we're doing, $5,000-6,000 is nothing to assure that the ballots are being handled properly, the boxes are safe and all that. So,
We have one question that came in on the chat. Can
yeah,
I just
let's
ask
start
that?
doing that.
Sure.
Yeah, this, so Kim Abel has asked, the League in Kitsap registers voters at many places, including farmers markets and high schools. Are there any changes we should be aware of as we ramp up this year?
Short answer, Kim, no changes. Nothing is changing at this point, but we'll get into that
Contain that.
later. But the quick, short answer right now for all of you is that if you're doing any kind of voter registration, nothing's changed. You're using the same forms, you're collecting the same information, and you're returning it to the same place. Nothing is changing this time. And that's, per conversations I've had with the Secretary of State, that, at this point in time, until we know everything and all of the logistics are worked out, it's still status quo. But, you go.
Can a citizen access that new processing center just to have a look?
Yes. Yeah.
Is there any requirement to make an appointment? Or-
No, in fact, we prefer you not. And then my reasoning behind it is simple. It's that we do the same thing day in, day out, whether you're there or not. And so I don't want you making an appointment because I don't want you to feel like we're gonna change what we're doing because we know somebody's coming.
Yeah.
And so we never take appointments for that. You just show up. They have you sign in, and we put a vest on you, a safety vest. And the safety vest is done for our benefit more than yours, because then we can see where our observers are. It's really easy to see somebody in a bright pink vest standing in a room full of people to say, we have an observer, we have an observer, we have an observer.
Does it have to be pink?
It has to be pink because we issue. Yeah, when we first, I told the staff, I said, I want vests for our observers. Because what often we'll do is I have a large monitor in my office and I will pull up the streaming camera from the processing center. And this was when it was in our office and I'd be able to see what was happening. So I didn't have to be in there all the time, but I was finding it hard to find observers. And it's like, well, how many observers do we have or what's going on? And if I watched long enough, it's like, okay, I know this person's observer. We have regulars, but, and I also have regular staff. So it's easy, over time you start figuring it out, but it's like, it needs to be easier than that. We need to be able, and so I said, get vests. So they got vests. They went and got green vests. And it's like, okay, green was a horrible color because it was actually like a forest green and it didn't stand out. I mean, your shirt and your vest could be the best. I mean, it was one of those. And so it's like, no, we need something bright. And so, because we use yellow and orange for our workers, we just had to find another color. And at first I was trying for a lavender, honestly, and this was
Perfect. Pink is perfect.
and the reason that lavender was just because lavender's our color, and I don't see it on this book, but you notice your envelope that you get is lavender. Any correspondence you get from my elections department has lavender on it. It's just the color of Kitsap County elections. And that's something that all the counties pretty much have some kind of a branded color because it makes it easier to identify their mail. So when we get a lot of ballots from other counties. So we have a ballot drop box that's really close to Pierce County. Out on the peninsula towards Purdy, we get a lot of Pierce County ballots. Mason County, so Pierce County is blue. Mason County is red. But also King County is red, but they're different. And so we get ballots from all over. In fact, we'll get ballots from Eastern Washington as well, but primarily it's just the surrounding counties. So it makes it really easy when we're emptying a drop box and we're sorting the ballots, because we count them and we get them staged to go through the machine. It's easy to toss out the ones from the other counties so that we can get those mailed off. And they don't fall into our count. They're counted, but they're counted separately. So when we do all of our counting, we have 100 ballots for Kitsap County, and we have 3 for Pierce and 2 for King. And so we will write on our sheet for each intake. We'll put 100 ballots for Kitsap, and we'll put 5, and we'll usually break that down 5 for other counties, and we'll do a 3 and 2, and we'll write some stuff in there. Then at the end of the election, it helps us when we're doing reconciling. We can then quickly say, okay, well, we know that our ballot drop boxes, we picked up this many ballots, and that we forwarded this many ballots to other counties, and then we can compare that against the sorting machine, because it has a counter, and it'll say we pushed this many ballots through that machine, so that corresponds with the number of the pickup and what came in through the mail, and then we can compare that against the ballot count from the tabulation equipment, and we know how many empty envelopes we had, because we track that as we're going through the opening. We'll have an envelope that was received that was by a registered voter, but they didn't put anything in it. So in our reconciliation, you'll see this many ballots received, this many sent out, this many empty, this many counted, this many challenged, and we reconcile the entire election. So by tracking all of these things throughout the election, we're able to then give you a full reconciliation, so that we can say, we did it right, we did all of what we received, and here it is. So, and then for the groups that are interested, they can track a lot of that, because there's those matchbacks. So that the matchback is that daily report of what ballot we processed that day, so who voted, and then the different campaigns will use it if they're doing doorbelling or phone calling. They'll use the matchback to determine who they need to call that day or go knock on their door. So they're trying to encourage somebody to vote that hasn't voted. Or if they're going into a neighborhood, they won't waste their time going to a house that's already voted. They'll skip it, because they know that they've matched back, that they've already voted. And so because of that, they also have those numbers of how many ballots, so they can compare that against our reconciliation. And, then they can say, okay, well, we see that these numbers are matching what you're reporting. So it gives them a little bit more trust in the process as well, because they're able to do their own kind of monitoring on their end. And a lot of what we do is just building trust in the process. I mean, that's the whole goal, is to create enough transparency that you can observe from home, or create enough transparency in the processing center that you can observe and see what you need to feel comfortable and trust the process. And along with that, so that goes to my next item here on the list, we're looking at creating a new program, a ride-along program, similar to like what the sheriff's office does, where you as a citizen can sign up and ride along with a deputy for their shift and observe what a sheriff's deputy does. We're looking at the same thing with ballot pickup, and offering a ride-along program so that you can ride along with the ballot pickup teams as they go out and open up these boxes, and go through the process and observe what it is that's happening in real time out in the field, so that you'll see both sides of it, because a lot of the observers are watching it from the office as those boxes come in, but they don't see what happens out in the field. And so we think that this ride-along program will just be one more level of information, one for, just the observer that's curious, and then 2 for the one that really wants to see, okay, what is going on? How do they do this? And so this is what we're looking at. And so we're working through some of the logistics at the county level. What does risk have concerns with us having, citizens riding in the vans, which we figure shouldn't be a problem, because they're already letting them ride with police officers. So we figure we can work through most all of the concerns that risk is going to have around that. But that's what we're working on right now. It's this ride-along program. And then one of the last things that with this new processing center that we're working on is we're working on expanding the observer experience. And what I mean by that is we have a lot of regular observers that come in, and they're asking us a lot of kind of regular questions about voter turnout, or after tabulation day, what are the numbers looking like? And so one of the things we're gonna do is we're gonna set up a station, a kiosk station for observers so that it'll have various information that they'll be able to just pull up on their own. We'll give them a dedicated area. This will serve two purposes. One, it'll give them a place that they can self-serve information, but the other is it'll give them an area that they can congregate. Because one of the problems we have, just in processing ballots and having observers, is that the observers will then start to congregate in the processing area and they start talking. And talking's fine until it's not, in the sense that our workers are counting ballots. They're counting envelopes. They're doing things that require their attention. And when there's a conversation that's happening over their shoulder, it's harder for them to do what they need to do. You know, one of the very first things that happens, and you've all seen it at some point, I assume, is that when they first get that tray of ballots, we know how many ballots are supposed to be in the tray because the machine has counted them out and has basically said there's 197 ballots in this tray. The first thing they do is they have to count all 197 ballots to make sure they're there. Because if they're not, we stop and we find whatever ballot is missing, if it's an over/under type thing, you know. And the machine, it's very rare that the number isn't right, but when it isn't, we find the ballot. And we can do that because nothing has been separated yet. We know what ballots, because the system, the machine as it scans them through has read the barcode, and it can tell us exactly what voters are in that batch. And by knowing that the count is off, we can run that batch back through the machine and it will then tell us who's missing. And so then we know who we're looking for. Now we just gotta figure out where to go. So we stop the process when the count would be off. And since getting the new machines, we haven't had the problems. When we had our older machine, it would double feed sometimes. And we found that we would end up with something off, but we would always reconcile because we were doing it at every tray. This new machine, it is so clean. It's scary how fast and what it does in that process. But yeah, so we do a reconciliation. The very first thing before we separate a ballot from an envelope, we need to account that there was supposed to be 197. There is 197, and if there's not, we're going to stop until we can make sure again we have 197. So giving them the observers an area that they can do their stuff, plus then it'll allow us also a space that we'll be able to put a lot of useful information for anybody that wants to observe, like what is the logic and accuracy test? How is it conducted? Why do we do it? What does it tell us? What is a random batch audit? How do we do it? Why do we do it? You know, all of the different things that go into the audits that we do during an election, how we might tabulate, or different, you know, things that might happen with a recount or whatever. We can do these one-page informationals, and we can give them, you know, at their fingertips, whatever information they want. So we're gonna work this into that area so that our observers will be able to get more information as they need it. And so that's kind of where we're at, you know, in the office. Going back to Kim's question about registration, we are looking at some of the potential impacts that both the executive order and the SAVE Act would have on us and what that would mean. But currently the SAVE Act hasn't been passed, so we're not having to address those concerns, although we are looking into what they may be. So the SAVE Act hasn't passed, but we do have the executive order, and as the league is aware, because you're one of the members involved in one of the 19 different suits that were brought against it, you know, there are many challenges to different pieces of that executive order. And so Washington State had joined in with the state of Oregon on their challenge to the order. And they chose Oregon specifically because Washington and Oregon are very similar in everything that we do with elections. California has some differences primarily around their equipment that they use and some of the services that they provide that the order addresses, and that creates a difference in our cases. They felt it would be cleaner that Washington and Oregon just stay together and approach it as one and not confuse something that California would need or something that Colorado might be needing. And so that's what we're watching now. And as you saw on Thursday, there was at least a stay or a continuation. So, you know, there's 90 more days. on that, and incidentally, that day, so Thursday was the 24th, that was the 30-day mark of the executive order, and so the Election Assistance Commission, the EAC, was required to have a new federal voter registration form on that day, so I'm not sure where that's at.
Oh, that's the executive order is that we need a new registration.
Well, yeah, so there's many things with the executive order, but it all, yeah, the first part of it had to do with the EAC requiring a new form. And that new form was going to require proof of citizenship. Where on the previous registration, the federal law required that you attest that you're a citizen. The executive order and the SAVE Act both require proof of citizenship. The difference between the two, and we're not sure how the executive order was supposed to play out. There's a lot of questions with the executive order, but the executive order required proof of citizenship, but it didn't say how that proof of citizenship was required. Where the SAVE Act, and so the SAVE Act is it's being run through the House and the Senate. It cleared the House, so the House approved the SAVE Act, and it's in the Senate now, and it's being debated in the Senate. But the Senate's version, so the SAVE Act requires that proof of citizenship be brought in person to my office. And so that's where it's going to start presenting issues for groups like yourself that are going out and doing voter registration drives and all of that, because you're not going to be able to provide that proof of citizenship, or I doubt anybody's going to give you a copy of their whatever it is. And in the case of the SAVE Act allows a birth certificate as proof of citizenship, but the executive order does not. So that was one of those one of the issues with the executive order is that it doesn't allow a birth certificate as proof of citizenship.
And what would they require?
Well,
Passport?
passport, enhanced or real ID, but states actually have a real ID that allows proof of citizenship. Others have real ID, but you don't have to be a citizen to get the real ID issued.
But don't you present a birth certificate to prove you're a citizen for your passport?
Yes.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
they allow a passport, but not everybody has a passport.
Correct, but I would say most of us have birth certificate. That is totally
But they're not,
logical,
yeah.
but
But then you start getting into the other issue of, and I hate to bring it up because it sounds horrible, and it probably sounds horrible to me because I'm a guy. But my wife
Right.
got married, had to change her name.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't like bringing that up as an argument, but that is the argument, is that your birth certificate doesn't match your married name.
Right.
And so what provisions are then made in the act to allow you to present other documentation? And the way I understand it is the SAVE Act has a mechanism that allows you to then, they have this, what was the documentation presented, was it one of these things or is it other? And they have an other category in the SAVE Act that would allow you to then bring your marriage certificate along with your birth certificate, along with your photo ID, that would build that chain of this person became this person, that's the person standing in front of you. But the executive order doesn't contain any information that would give us an understanding of what would be acceptable in the absence of a passport, and a birth certificate isn't considered acceptable and you don't have real ID. So that these are those things that they're working out, but there is a provision in the SAVE Act of these.
We're doing so much more QR code voter registration than that's our primary method now. How is that going to work if it's all on computer?
And again, that's not clear because it says in person in the SAVE Act where it doesn't require an executive order. So if the executive order, if it just has to be, you have to have a proof, then what the executive order says for us is that the proof that you present, we have to record the document you brought us, the date it was issued, if it was signed by anybody in particular. There's certain information they want us to gather, but that doesn't say that we need to keep a copy of it. And that's part of my concern with looking at it, is that at what point will it be challenged that, well, did that document even really exist? So unless I have a copy of it that's in my system, how am I really going to be assured that, that I met that? And part of that concern stems from I believe the executive order, and I apologize, I can find it in my papers here, but one of the acts or orders says that I can be held legally responsible and sued if I don't follow the rules. So if I don't have a copy of a document and somebody is challenging that, at what point is my word or the information that we've collected going to be enough, or am I going to have a copy of the document as my ultimate, here it is, this is what was presented? I don't know. These are those unanswered questions. Yeah.
Yeah, a quick question from me. So you said that the EAC was required to have the new form or some version of it in place by the 24th.
Yes.
And that we assume happened, but then there was a federal ruling
That paused it.
that paused
Yeah.
any implementation. Is there any, I mean, how are you thinking about when this might be finalized as it pertains to your timeline for election preparations? Like, is this gonna,
We don't know.
yeah, it seems like,
So the order, the order went into effect, it had different timelines on it based on certain things. So the first one was the 30-day, and that was the new form. The next one is that, the EAC has to recertify, so decertify and recertify all election equipment. And they have to certify that equipment to a, it's got a term for it, the voluntary voter something, what is it? Voluntary Voting System Guidelines 2.0. So the Elections Assistance Commission shall initiate appropriate action to amend the Voluntary Voting System Guideline 2.0 and issue other appropriate guidelines. So they have to decertify and then recertify. And one of the problems currently is that there are no systems that meet that VVSG 2.0, so that Voluntary Voting System Guideline. There is nothing. There is one system that has been submitted for certification, but certification takes about 9 months. So we don't know currently I don't know what system. I'm sure we could find out. I don't know who submitted to meet those standards, and I don't know how long ago and where it is in that process, but that there are currently no systems being used that meet the 2.0 standard.
is that nationally?
Yes. And so that presents the challenge of this order says that for us to conduct a federal election, so our first federal election is August 2nd, 2026. So for us to conduct a federal election, we have to use equipment that is 2.0 certified. Yes.
Yes, I was wondering, this is definitely not cost effective for the number of illegal voters that vote in this country and the ones that vote in this country. Is that deep? Well, who could account for the new administration? But it just doesn't seem reasonable that we would be spending, and every one of our voting systems have to abide by a rule that I don't know if any Washingtonians voted illegally at all.
And there's not, one of these slides here, there is not actually significant proof. They said non-citizen voting is rare. And we know that it will happen occasionally, and I know it's happened here in Kitsap County, and it's an unfortunate thing because they were registered as part of the process of getting their driver's license. They subsequently voted, and now they can no longer be a citizen of the United States because they have voted. That makes them ineligible for citizenship.
For the rest of their lives?
For the rest of their lives.
Yes.
Wow, I didn't
And
realize.
so one of the things that happens, and it happens probably 6 8 times a year, we'll get somebody coming into our office that's not a citizen that has been registered to vote, and they are frantic panic that they need to be deregistered. And part of the process for us is we first pull up their registration, we verify that they've never voted. We verify how they were initially registered to vote, and then we actually sign a letter, I sign a letter that says that, this person has, been removed from the voting system and has never voted. Per our records, and so that is what they use then as part of their citizenship package when they're applying for citizenship, because it is going to pop up somewhere probably that they were registered. And then they have that documentation that goes along with it, says, now I found out I got registered, I got myself unregistered and I never voted. And so we give them a packet of stuff, we give them copies of a bunch of things that we have. That shows that they have no voting history with us, so. But it's rare that they do get through, but it does happen because, depending on the information that they provide us, we use, Social Security Administration has a verification system, and it verifies a social security number and a birth date, that goes along with a name, but you don't always have to be a citizen to get a social security number issued to you, just like you don't always have to be a citizen to get a real ID issued to you. There are different exceptions in the system and in each of those systems. So the biggest problem we have is that there is no central repository either for suspected or proven cases of non-citizen voting. So there is no central place that we can go to dispel the belief that non-citizens are voting. And there's no place that we can go to report it so that we could provide records later. It's just, it's kind of a state by state, and it's kind of an incident by incident, because it doesn't happen enough that it happens. But likewise, there's not really any one system to prove citizenship. So you're gonna give me a document, but I don't have one agency that I can go to, one website that I can go to. Like with Social Security, I can verify the Social Security number and a birthday and information about you, but there's nowhere I can go to verify that you're a citizen. One of the things in the executive order that I think is also in the SAVE Act is access to Homeland Security's system. But Homeland Security system only has non-citizen information, and only the non-citizens that they have had some kind of a contact with. So it's not a complete database. So I can't rely on Homeland Security to give me citizen information, because you aren't going to be on that list. Because you're a citizen, they only keep non-citizen, and they only keep the non-citizens that they know about. So it makes it more challenging when we start looking at these two orders and the impacts on them. How are we going to be able to get the information that's being required and be assured that, that we've properly done it? Yeah, the executive order has, so I said the certification of the equipment. That's a process. So you start talking about timelines, 180 days. So we're looking at 6 months. The order was signed on March 25th. So 6 months, pushes us out to September. I've got an election, 11 months later, but I have non-certified equipment. What does it take to get it certified to be able to conduct an election? And then we start getting into okay, let's split hairs in this a little. Let's get technical. We can't use a non-certified system for an election. I use my system to generate the ballots. How we design the ballot, how we do layout, everything we do about a ballot is done in that system, that tabulation and voting system. So am I allowed to generate a ballot out of a system that's not certified? That's not clear to me based on the rules or the order that's being presented. And so how would I create a ballot if my system isn't allowed to be used and I have an election coming up? But and then it compounds from there. I can tell you that, hand counting ballots, we can do it, but it takes a long time. So if I can generate a ballot, but I can't use the equipment to count those ballots, then now we start getting into how much time would it actually take to, and then the problem with the primary is we have a timeline in both elections. With a primary and a general election, we have to certify an election within so many days. So how many people is it going to take, and how big of a space do we need to be able to get through counting all of those elections? We did a hand recount of the sheriff's race in 22. And the hand recount took us just under 2 weeks, but about half that time was just getting the ballots organized in a way that we could count them. The next half of that time was just physically counting, because you count the ballots, 2 people count them independently of each other, and then a third person independently then gets those numbers and confirms that they counted them the same. And if they don't count them exactly the same, then those ballots are passed off to another group of 2 people who start all over, not knowing what the original counts were. They count them again themselves. And then another third independent person is involved in the verifying that those numbers matched and that they matched the information we had. So it is time consuming to do a hand recount or a hand count. Yeah.
I feel pretty stupid because I don't know this. So if the SAVE Act passes or this executive order, does that mean that all of us are going to have to re-register as citizens?
This is a great question. We don't know. And I'll say why we don't know, because the executive order doesn't say. The executive order just says you have to provide proof of citizenship. The SAVE Act actually has a provision for grandfather. So you as a registered voter would be grandfathered only until a time in which you need to make a change. You move, you have a name change, anything like that, anything that would require some kind of a change of address even. So maybe you didn't move, but you were using PO box and now you're not using, or you changed your PO box. That's a change, and now we're going to require proof of citizenship. So in the SAVE Act, we know that there is specifically written a provision to grandfather an existing registered voter. The executive order does not talk about that. And thanks to Alan, I'm going to call him out again. He has told me that in legalese, there are, because it doesn't say it, or if it does say it, you can't interpret it either way. It has to be very definitive, otherwise it's an assumption. And he called me several times. There were things where we were talking where it's like, well, it doesn't say this. He says, yeah, but it doesn't also, positively say it. So you can't make that assumption either way. I learned from Ellen, and I carried that with me. And so because it doesn't say it, we don't know. So what I can tell you about that, because I did the math on it, as of Tuesday of this week, if we had to recertify all 200,000 registered voters in the county, I would have to see 771 voters a day. And these are business days between now and August 2nd to get you all re-registered in the system so you could vote on August 2nd of 2026. For us to see 771 voters a day, I would probably have to rent the Fairgrounds Pavilion to have a parking lot large enough and a floor space big enough that I could have enough staff with counters and computers and all of that to be able to manage a lift that big.
And who's footing the bill for this? Because I don't think there was a
There's no
funding
there's no funding
provision in that act.
Yes.
Yes, that's what I figured.
And just like the executive order that says all equipment has to be decertified and recertified, if I have to buy new equipment, there's no funding mechanism for new equipment. The upgrade that we just did from the one version to our current version, I believe we were somewhere in the $500,000 range for that upgrade. So if we had to upgrade again, I'm expecting that we would be spending somewhere in that same range again, and they would have to have a certified system. And if there's only one system and it's not our company, now we're also having to learn how to use a whole new system on top of that. One of the best things about elections in the United States is we all do things a little bit different, going back to the kind of the tinkering idea is that we're all doing it a little bit different, which means it's also hard to compromise the system. Because Washington, we've got our rules and we've got our equipment and everything, but I'm using different equipment than Pierce County's using, and King County uses different than Thurston, and and our ballots all look different and our envelopes look different and all that. But if we're all on one standardized system, now we have one point of contact basically that makes it a lot easier to compromise. Where because we're all doing it slightly different, it's a lot harder to compromise the system as a whole, because you can't figure out how to hack into, you might figure out, you might think you have a way of getting into a system. I can tell you that you can't get into these systems because you physically have to touch them. The systems aren't connected to the internet in any way. That's that air gapping. They sit in a room that is not connected to the internet. There's no internet in that room at all. There's no wireless technology in the systems. The keyboard and mouse are wired to the system. The system that has a encrypted hard drive. It's in a sealed case. So to compromise my system, you would have to get physical access into the room and then physical access to the machine. And we would be able to tell at that point that the system had been compromised. Plus, the system itself has that encrypted hard drive, and any reboot that is forced on that system requires the system to have a password put into it to unlock it. And I don't have that password. Only the vendor has that password. And if I'm calling the vendor asking for the password to unlock the system, they've already told me that they will require the system be sent back and they'll send me a new machine. They will unlock it. They will want to know exactly why that system needed to be rebooted and why it was calling for a password. So there's been a lot of talks of, well, they can wirelessly force your computer to reboot, because there's this historical story about the Iranian nuclear program and how they used virus USB drives that somebody inserted into the machine, and then they forced a power surge on the system that made the system reboot. And when the system rebooted, the virus USB drive took over, installed itself in the system, and then they corrupted the whole nuclear program by inserting a virus. My system won't do that. There is no way to, we lock the USB ports, so nobody can just walk in and slide a device in. We put locks on them, and then we put a seal over them, and if you break the seal, we have a whole seal log that goes along with supporting the fact that this was a secured port on the machine. But the whole idea of forcing a reboot on a system would then just cause the system to want to have the password protection would take over. So the systems are so hard. But if we're all using the same equipment, now we have more time to play with it. And there's these, you'll hear stories of how hackers have hacked into, ballot terminals, when you go to a polling place and you're using an electronic voting device and you're voting. And that's because they've actually been given access to the machine. They were challenged, can you do this in 30 minutes? They use screwdrivers, they use soldering irons, they soldered in their own electronic components that they could plug a computer into to then get into the system. And, that was fully compromised. There was no way you were gonna hide that. And so these systems, but if you give somebody enough time, anybody can break in. I mean, give them enough time, but the proof will be there. We would see that somebody broke the seal on the door getting in, and that would stop everything right there. We'd start the whole election over. With the ballots we have, we could recount them because we have a paper ballot, because everything is paper based. We could just replace the count. We would start over if we had some kind of a compromise. So electronic stuff, once you're in that electronic world, you don't have paper backup. You don't have that ability to audit yourself that way or start over. So that's one of the nice things that 2020 taught a lot of counties was. A lot of them had started going down this digital route where they didn't have a paper backup at all. And after 2020, they just said, okay, we're going to paper backup everything. And so that is now in place. And so we do have paper backups for everything. But the amount of time to go through and start that over, it erodes that trust more than anything. I'm going to stop for 1 second because it's 11:10. I want to make sure that we're still doing okay with your schedule.
Yeah. Does anyone have any specific questions?
I want to make sure you have time for your own business and not me just talking.
There is one more question that came in from the chat. Kim, again, she's had to hop off to another meeting, so she's not here on the call any longer. And she asked if I would ask it at an appropriate time, but we haven't kind of gotten to this topic. But she says, what is the buzz about the numbers of candidates for the 2025 local election season?
It's a good question. And I brought our campaign book here. We don't know yet. To answer your question, Kim, specifically, we don't know what the buzz is. I can tell you that there are 70 offices that are on the ballot for this election.
Did you say 70?
70,
Yeah.
70 positions.
That's too many. You're gonna have to
Well, yeah.
do something about
You'll have
it.
to talk to the water districts and all the different, cities. This is the municipal election, so we end up with, school boards and city councils. All the different port districts, fire commissioners, all of those are on the water districts, the parks district, sewer district. We have all of these offices, on the ballot this time. And, so that, there's 70 positions, that are on the ballot. Filing week is officially May 5th through the 9th. However, you can file by mail now. That started on the 21st. We don't do anything with it until Monday the 5th, but you can fill out the paperwork. So if you're filing for office, you can fill out that paperwork and submit it now. And that's per our CW, the provision for that. And then that starts the rest of the process for us. So after a candidate files, they have 11 days. They have to provide their candidate statements to us, photos, all of that, so that we can start working on the voter pamphlet that you'll get. It gives us 32 physical days from the time we get that statement to the on May 20th, when we get all the statements and photos. We have 32 physical days in which to build a voter pamphlet, because the military ballots go out then on June 21st. So we have a digital pamphlet available for military voters or anybody else on our website by the 21st of June. And then you'll physically receive your pamphlet in the mail sometime around the 18th, 19th of July. We mail them, we say we mail them on the 18th, sometimes it's a day early because of the print house that does the pamphlets is being overwhelmed with stuff and they want to start moving product, and if ours is ready, it goes out early. But it will be mailed by the 18th. And then the primary is on the 5th, but our ballots will go out. Actually, I apologize, I read that wrong. The 18th of July is when your primary ballot goes out. The 11th of July is when we mail the pamphlet. So we have a very tight window of time. We have a lot of proofreading that we do on the pamphlets, because we have to make sure we don't introduce an error. But we also have this kind of interesting law rule that we also don't correct your error. So if you submit a statement to us with misspellings or misstatement, whatever, the only thing we will correct is we have certain rules that have to be upheld, like, you know, that you're supposed to talk about yourself and about the office, and, you know, so you can't disparage another candidate, nor can you endorse a candidate. That was a situation that happened in Mason County where somebody filed to run, but they weren't wanting to run. They just wanted to have the statement say, I fully support this other guy. And so that got stopped because the rules say you have to talk about yourself. So yeah, it starts our window of time.
So going back to their candidate statement, if they introduce misinformation, that stays in, correct?
Yeah, we can't police that, and nor do you really want us to. I mean, there's varying opinions on that, but I don't want to be in the position of policing, because then it appears more heavy-handed and like I'm.
Well, and partisan, it could appear partisan from your.
Yeah, and so I don't want to be involved in that, but we will hold to the, you gotta talk about yourself. And we've had statements that have had to be rewritten at state level races, where state rules say you pretty much can do whatever you want, but local rules are very specific. And so we've had to have candidates running for state positions rewrite a statement, so they actually have two different looking statements because of those rules.
So the information becomes publicly available about who is running on that June 18th when
Well,
the military ballot, or when?
Actually, on May 9th.
On May 9th.
Yes,
it's
who's
then-
running, because at 5 o'clock on May 9th,
Okay.
we will have the complete list of all candidates.
Great.
And so we publish on our website and we update it every hour or whatever it is. It updates with all of the new filings throughout that whole week. And so by May 9th, we will have a complete list. However, on May 12th, which is the Monday following, that is the last day you can withdraw. So you could have filed earlier in the week and withdrawn during the week, or you could have filed and then decided on Monday the 12th to withdraw your candidacy. So there could be somebody removing themselves on that Monday, but nobody else will be added after 5 o'clock on May 9th.
Got it. I know Kim's asking for a candidate forum, planning purposes.
Yeah, yeah, so, watch our website, Kim, I'm sure, talks with Steve Gardner.
Yeah.
Reach out to Steve, Steve is the one that handles all of that intake. For candidate filings, and so, we know, and everybody knows that the library is running a measure in August, so we know we have one measure, we don't know of any others at this point, but, measures have their own deadlines, that they also have that are slightly different. They have to give us committees, for and against committees and things like that after they do their initial, filing on that.
Thank you.
Okay.
More of a local question, maybe I need to talk to Linda about it, but, and I'm not very good about knowing what's on the website and stuff, but when we go out to, register at the high schools and we get the 16 and 17-year-olds, we're pretty foggy about what that means. And sometimes we thought about that if we had something to give to them that was coming from your office or whatever, about what that means in terms of,
That they'll be contacted,
yeah,
because we're kind of mumbled through that part.
yeah.
Yeah, and we won't contact them until we actually put them in the system.
Right, but just that some, like, if we had some sort of statement that, so that they had an understanding, I don't know, maybe that should come through you and.
Are you suggesting maybe just a strip of paper that just says, hey,
Well, or
look forward
maybe,
to being contacted?
Here's what
and maybe it could also be on the bookmark, you know, that has the QR code and all of it, I don't know, I know Maureen and I have talked about that a little bit, so just something that was
Let's
formal from the
but
county.
let's work on that.
Also, what happens when they register, when they get their driver's license too,
Right.
right?
exactly.
So
Yeah, and I'm making a note here,
Making a note.
I'm not texting
are they?
anymore. What I'm making note is to remember, what I'm thinking is maybe something that would be helpful for you is if we create, and we may have something already, but I'll verify, a webpage for 16 and 17-year-old registered voters that you could then point them to that will then explain for them, you know, you don't expect to hear from us at this point.
Perfect.
But one of the other things where I thought you were going with it is, a lot of times what I've gone out with your group to a couple of schools and the kids say, well, I can't remember if I registered or not. Doesn't matter, just register again.
Yeah.
It truly
That's
doesn't
what we
matter
say.
because you're only gonna get in the system once. And even if you register as Joe and your name's Joseph and you put Joseph on the second registration, we're gonna catch it because the birthday's gonna match, the address is gonna match, there's gonna be that name similarity. We do a lot of, when we do maintenance on the database, we do a lot of duplicate checking and we do things like that. We're looking for Pat, Patricia, Joe, Joseph, Richard, you know, all of those different variations. And then we're looking at birth dates and addresses, you know, last four social security, your driver's license number. I mean, all of these different things we're comparing to find, do we have two voters that have given us the same information? They're probably the same person. You know, and we're doing things like that. So, yeah, I just say if they're in doubt, just register again. And we'll work it out on our end. They go into a file, and then as they get closer, then we bring them into the system, because if they turn 18 by the general election, they're allowed to vote in primary. But they can only vote on things that don't have a financial impact. So they can vote in that winnowing process where you're bringing the candidate number down to 2 candidates. So they'll get issued a separate ballot that looks different than the ones that their parents have, for that, you know, for that purpose. Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to, first of all, I wanted to commend your staff. They're very helpful and very friendly and nice to get along with. However, I had a friend who was blind and had a smartphone, which the surface is smooth. So he couldn't feel where the numbers were when he tried to, because he didn't have a specialized phone. He asked me to contact often to make sure he was registered. Even when he moved, it was just across the street, but it was a different, one of those border things, you know.
Oh, we changed precincts
The
or
different
some
precincts.
boundary.
Yeah, and so I called on that and they did that just well, fine. But he said that he could not call by himself because of his smartphone and because it requires hitting a number on his phone to go to talk to a human being. And otherwise he would get this menu of things, to come up with, and he didn't have any way of identifying any of those. So I'm not sure what you do for blind people, but he was very dependent on me. But he thanked everybody when they contacted him again, were really nice to him, very polite, very patient. And I just wanted to commend you for that. And every time I call. The problem is, unfortunately, he died in January, and there's been no way, I mean, I don't know, I was just a friend to call and say that he died and will not be voting again. His sister-in-law is a friend of mine, and she doesn't know if she has the right to call
She can,
impart
yeah,
that
she
information.
can, we'll need other information from her. The best way to do it, and if she's living in the same house that he was, or if the mail is forwarding,
No, she lived here,
okay.
and that's how I met him.
So if somebody's receiving his mail, just write deceased on it and drop it in one of our ballot drop boxes or do return mail on it. That's one of the processes. The other is she doesn't have to do anything because he was registered here, he lived here and he died here. We will get that information from the Social Security Department. We get a monthly master death index. And so we go through it and we find voters, we find our voters, and then that starts a process also for us for inactivating, removing.
Okay,
But yeah, she could call and start the process.
Yeah. she wasn't
being-
sure because his daughter lives in Arizona and doesn't know anything about Washington
Yeah.
State's.
Yeah,
uh,
we will get it. So like if there was an obituary, just as an example, I mean, in this situation, there may not have been, but if there's an obituary, we look at the obituaries. So that's another source that we use for verifying that somebody's passed away. So we have many ways of getting there, but Social Security is going to be one of the primary ones. And then any return mail that we get, if they didn't do anything with it, the post office at some point is just gonna start sending back the mail that would have gone to them, and so our ballot is gonna be sent back non-deliverable. And at that point, that ballot, we will inactivate his registration, and if nothing else happens, we'll send out a letter after we inactivate, because we had return mail. If we get nothing more after 2 years, we remove them because they're inactive. So it does work itself out. That's part of that standard maintenance. It becomes a lot harder when the person was registered here and they were living out of state, they passed away out of state, their obituary may have been filed in, Arizona as an example, and so now we don't have all that current information. So now we're gonna rely more on the family. And we do have some situations where the family just doesn't do anything with that ballot. I had somebody complaining to me that, yeah, my mother-in-law passed away and, you never, you never removed her registration. It's like, okay, let's talk about this. We send you a ballot. Yeah, we get it every election. You never thought to call me or do anything with it? No. Okay, I mean, part of the responsibility also falls on the household or whatever. Just like if you got a ballot all of a sudden to your house that was for somebody you don't even know, what would you do? I would tell you to call me. Because that's the fastest way to be proactive and make sure that elections are being managed properly. I mean, it could have been an error on the part of the register, they could have messed up their address, it could have been something we might have done. I don't know. It's just, if you're receiving a ballot at your house for somebody that's not there, contact us. Because then we will start another process. And that process means you're probably gonna get a letter from us to that person again, but it's just because we have sent out a letter that is, we're inactivating you until we can confirm that you're living here. Once we inactivate you, we don't send another ballot. And you're not gonna hear from us again until, well, you won't hear from us at all. We'll just, we will cancel your registration.
I also wanted to say, and I commend your office again, that I didn't realize that I was in the hospital, about 3 years ago. And I was desperate to get my ballot in, because I'm one of those kind of voters.
Okay.
I had it, and the nurse came in and I said, I've got to get this in, I want it in on time. And she said, oh, well, we'll just turn it in at the office and they'll turn it into the registrar. And I didn't know you had that service.
I mean, any ballot can be mailed, so I mean, it's really easy. A lot of places like that, hospitals, home facilities like this, they're very accommodating to make sure that anybody that wants to be able to
Well,
vote, that
thank
it's
you.
legal can. One of the things you kind of brought up, and we don't talk about it much, we have an accessibility committee. As part of elections, we meet with them once, twice a year, more if we need to, but that committee is made up of community members like yourself that have accessibility concerns or needs that you may have, that maybe somebody that's blind, have hearing issues, whatever their need might be. We formed this committee with people in the community that actually can relate to the issues that they're having. And one of the things that we've done is we've actually set up our vote centers with the keeping a wheelchair in mind. And how can we provide a voting space that provides you privacy and is accessible? And we have Braille voter pamphlets. So every voting center has a Braille pamphlet. Now, granted, it's Braille, so it's about this thick because of how we have to have them printed. But it provides, again, for somebody like your friend that, if they're not, we understand through this community also that a lot of people that maybe blind, they tend to get together in groups and they'll do voting parties where they'll have somebody that can read a pamphlet or provide other information that would be easier to provide to them. But then in our voting centers, we have these vote machines that produce a printed ballot that you can hear the ballot being read to you, and you can make your selections on a keypad that is Braille enabled. One of the interesting things for me, is we have Braille on our ballot drop boxes, and I question, ballot drop boxes are typically drop off somebody driving up to a car because we put it with the Braille's on the snorkel side, which is where the car's at. And I'm thinking, well, is the person that needs to use this actually in the right location? So we do have, there's Braille on our drop boxes as well with all the information. So this accessibility committee helps us with understanding the needs of the community. Just even in some of the simple stuff, like font sizes or colors or all these different things. So it's a really nice partnership we have that helps us better set up the office in a way that the biggest challenge, and I apologize if you feel like I'm singling you out, but you're a great example. Things that we try to do is we try to make the experience seamless, so that when you come in to vote, it's no different than when you come in to vote. And that is something that we really work hard at trying to make that a seamless, the experience is the same, whether you have a need or you don't have a need, you're not gonna know because you're gonna come in and assimilate just like everybody else. And that's one of those things that we really work hard at accomplishing is that equity of making sure that the experience is equal for everybody. And so, yeah, if there's ever anything that you notice in any part of the process, I highly encourage you to contact the office. Again, Steve is the best person to start at because he handles all of our public information and he organizes this committee and all of that, but he's a great contact.
I didn't know anything about the Braille voting. And so I didn't ever tell him about it.
Yeah, it's something we started probably 4 years ago or so, might have been a little longer than that. We found out it was something that was a capability. It costs some money, that's why we limit how many we do, and we can't just send them out to people that might need them because of, it is cost prohibitive, but it is important enough to be able to offer it. So we do it at all of our vote centers.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you can share it with somebody else. You may end up finding it later that, would benefit from that as well.
I tend to find a lot of people with disabilities and like, some strange reason.
Yeah.
Is there any more?
One last, have you been about, I would say a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, the Washington Post did an in-depth review of what are the real voting systems like and how is it playing out? And they said of comments, positive comment was listed Washington State. Did you get a lot of other states coming to see how to do it right then?
We get that, and I get it when I go to conferences that are national, where we get people that come, and their challenge when they come from another state is just the comprehension of 18 voting days, and how we're doing everything basically through the mail. See, for them, it's one day, but then what they're doing is they're separating out that idea that they still are offering that absentee ballot, and it's no different. But in some places, the absentee ballot is treated different because they can't start counting them until after election day, where that kind of puts them a little bit behind because they're trying to play catch up with all the other votes that are coming in as well. Where for us, we start processing 18 days before, as ballots start coming in, once we get enough of a stack to start, we start processing. The system locks us out from being able to tabulate, so we have no idea what the results are, but it allows us to move ballots through so that we'll have more counted by election day. That's Washington prides itself almost to a fault at times of being that their goal is to be the best. They want to be the easiest to vote, most accessible, everything. And if they slide, which happens, Colorado will pass us one year and Oregon might pass us or whatever. But they're always looking for ways to raise that bar so they can be number one. And I say almost to a fault because some of the things that we end up having to do actually create a little more work for us, or they add a level of difficulty that we have to work through. And it does benefit the voter in the end, yes, but it's at what point have we done enough, or I don't know. I want to make sure everybody that has a chance to vote, that legally can does, and whatever that takes is good. As far as my opinion on whether we have to verify a document or you attest to being a citizen or whatever it is. I mean, that's just whatever the rule is the rule I'm gonna follow. And we had, one administration or several administrations that have felt that just the attestation was fine. There's been a change and where that falls, that's for somebody else to decide. I will just administer whatever's necessary. I have concerns with those barriers, is it gonna prohibit somebody that should be able to vote to not be able to vote? And how can we get around that? I've had some conversations with Secretary of State around the fact that if you had to have a copy of a certified marriage license as an example, I have to charge you for that because state law says I have to charge for it. There's an RCW that says I have to charge for the certified copy. Well, our legislators could pass a new law that says for the purpose of voting, I can issue a certified copy of the marriage license at no cost. So we're trying to find ways to remove those barriers inside of an environment that has requirements. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, the law says I have to collect money for it. So we can change that because it's a local law or state law. So those are the types of things that we'll administer to whatever the law is. And then we'll look to see, are there ways that we can make it easier and still conform to the laws that are necessary.
But for the record, the League of Women Voters of the United States has come out against the SAVE Act, and the information is on our website and on the website for the LWVUS. But it's mostly because it will disenfranchise or has the potential to disenfranchise about 68,000, no, it's more than that, it's tens of thousands, maybe it's tens of millions, it might be, I don't know. You have to look at the numbers, but they're very strongly opposed, yeah.
And I understand that, and I understand where both sides are coming from.
Oh, yeah.
And for me, I get both sides, so I'm not in, I mean, I'm an administrator. My job is to administrate the elections to whatever the law is, and, you know, those opinions, I think we'll let the others work it out, because I have to do whatever is ultimately
In
gonna
the
be the
end,
law.
yes.
And I have to represent everybody, even in the county, and I don't say have to, I want to. I want to make sure that everybody feels like I am truly kind of nonpartisan in this, and that my interest is in making sure that we have an election. And that the votes that we receive are counted correctly, and that the people that are voting, that, you know, have the ability to vote, and only the people that should vote are voting, and whatever those laws that then dictate that are the things that, you know, I have to make sure I'm balancing that for everybody. But I understand the league has a position, and just like, you know, everything else, we know that there's impacts, and is that, you know, are those impacts equal and fair?
Right.
Well, thank you very
Yeah,
much, Bob.